I thought I was dead. For several seconds, I truly believed that. The cold was too deep, too unnatural, as if it came from inside my bones. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe properly. The light above me flickered pale and fluorescent, casting a sickly hue on the tiled ceiling. The smell hit me next bleach old blood metal. Then I heard it. The drip. The slow, wet plop of something hitting stainless steel. It didn't sound like a hospital. It sounded wrong. I forced my eyes to open. My body was stiff, heavier than it should have been. Around me, silver tables, white sheets covering still bodies. This wasn't a recovery room. This wasn't even a hospital wing. It was a morgue. I lay on a slab meant for the dead, and I was still alive. Panic swelled in my chest, wild and rising. I tried to sit up, but a tearing pain exploded in my abdomen. I screamed, but it came out as a whimper. My hand found the source, a bandaged wound. My fingers trembled as they pulled the gauze back, revealing a fresh, jagged incision just below my ribs. Crusted blood. Uneven stitches. The kind of scar that doesn't come from something planned. Then came the footsteps, sharp, deliberate, echoing down the hall. Heels. I heard the door squeal open. She stepped in like she owned the room. Rebecca, my sister. Dressed in black hair, perfect, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch when she saw me awake, didn't ask how I felt. She walked up, heels tapping softly against the floor, and looked down at me with something that wasn't pity, wasn't love, just cold calculation. "You shouldn't be awake yet," she said. My lips were cracked. I whispered, "What? What happened?" She tilted her head, curious like a scientist watching a test subject twitch. "You're in the morgue, Laura. You were declared stable, then unconscious again. Perfect time to intervene." My heart raced, pounding in my ears, making everything spin. "What did you do to me?" I gasped. She leaned in slowly, crouching beside me close enough that I could feel her breath. And then she said it. Quiet, almost tender. "How much do you think a kidney goes for these days?" My breath caught. I couldn't respond. Couldn't blink. Her words sliced through me cleaner than the scalpel ever could. She wasn't joking. My own sister had me cut open, sold a part of me, and stood there admiring her work. "You took my kidney." I choked. Rebecca smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, just satisfied. "You always gave so much and asked for so little." She stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her coat. "Rest. You'll need it." She paused at the door, then added without turning, "They only wanted one, but I told them you wouldn't mind coming back for the other." Then she was gone, leaving me in a room full of corpses with a wound still open and a horror only just beginning. Long before I woke up on a cold steel slab with a stolen kidney and a sister who could whisper about organ prices like they were grocery items, I was just the younger one, the quieter one, the mistake. That's what my mother always called me, even if not with those exact words. "You weren't planned," she'd say, looking off like she was recalling a foggy tragedy. But we managed. Rebecca was different. She was the golden child, the miracle, the prodigy. She walked early, spoke eloquently by age 2, and danced ballet like she'd been born in a spotlight. At every family gathering, relatives would coo at her and barely notice me hiding behind my paperbacks in the corner. When I was 5, I drew a crayon mural on the wall, an entire forest scene with birds and rivers and sunshine. My mother screamed at me for making a mess. When Rebecca painted a crooked rainbow a week later, she got it framed. Even then, I learned quickly that my role was to observe, not to shine. Rebecca wasn't cruel in obvious ways. No hair-pulling or slaps. Her cruelty was quieter, more elegant. When I wore a dress she'd outgrown, she'd smile and say, "It looks almost good on you." When I won a school art contest, she'd say, "They must have had a low turnout this year." And yet, I adored her. I longed for her approval like sunlight. I'd stay up late helping her study when she had exams. I'd lie to our parents for her when she came home drunk in high school. I once gave her my birthday money because she claimed she needed new dance shoes. She didn't. She bought vodka. Our parents saw none of this. To them, she was an angel, and I was functional. I wasn't a problem, but I wasn't impressive either. Invisible. That was my superpower, and I used it to survive. I learned to fold myself smaller in her presence to stay quiet when she was speaking to let her lead, and I'd follow. It was easier that way. Safer. But resentment is a slow acid. You don't notice it eating through until the structure collapses. In college, when I finally moved out, there was a brief flicker of freedom. I studied art education, got a job teaching third graders how to draw without fear. I dated a kind man named James who said I had eyes like storm clouds and meant it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was my own person. But then the calls started. Rebecca, needing money, needing help, needing a place to crash. She never asked. She expected. And like always, I gave in. James didn't understand it. "Why do you let her walk all over you?" he asked once after she borrowed my car for a weekend and returned it with a dent. I didn't answer. How could I explain that this was the dynamic carved into me since birth? She needed. I served. That's how it worked. That's how it always worked. When James proposed, Rebecca made a scene at dinner. "Laura's not the marrying type," she laughed to our parents. "She can barely decide what to eat, let alone a life partner." I laughed too, nervously. And 2 weeks later, I told James I wasn't ready. He left. Rebecca moved into my apartment shortly after. "Just until I figure things out," she said. That was 2 years ago. Somewhere in that timeline, I stopped believing I had ownership over my life. Somewhere, I stopped noticing that every time she smiled, something inside me curled away. So, no, it wasn't just about the kidney. That moment in the morgue wasn't the beginning. It was the result. The conclusion of a story that began the day I was born into her shadow. The organ was just the first thing she took with a scalpel. She'd been cutting pieces out of me my whole life. This time she just made it literal. The pain began 3 days before the morgue. It was dull at first, an ache that pulsed along my right side every time I turned too quickly or bent down to pick something up. I told myself it was probably a strained muscle. Maybe I'd slept wrong. I didn't want to make a fuss. Rebecca had always said I was dramatic. When we were kids, I once fell off the swings and dislocated my shoulder. She told our mom I was faking because I didn't want to clean the bathroom that week. It wasn't until I passed out from the pain that they believed me. So, no, I didn't rush to the hospital. I stretched. I drank water. I took Tylenol. But by the second night, I was waking up in cold sweats curled into myself like a dying animal. The third morning, Rebecca found me on the floor of the kitchen. I don't remember falling. 1 minute I was making tea, the next I was staring at the cabinet baseboard, my vision tunneling. She crouched beside me, her expression unreadable. "You don't look good," she said, brushing my hair back with mechanical gentleness. "You need to go in." I nodded, too weak to argue. She drove us to a clinic on the edge of town, not the hospital I'd usually go to. I asked why, and she said something about shorter wait times and knowing someone on staff. I remember the reception area was quiet, too quiet, like no one wanted to admit they were there. A nurse with tired eyes took my vitals, asked questions, and handed me forms I could barely focus on. My hand trembled as I signed them. Rebecca hovered answering for me when I hesitated. "She's in a lot of pain. Family history of kidney issues, maybe appendicitis." The nurse nodded and wheeled me into an exam room. I don't remember much after that, only fragments, a needle, the cold touch of gel on my abdomen, the faint buzz of an ultrasound, the doctor's voice low and quick, something about imaging and needing a minor procedure. Rebecca signing something, my own hand moving a pen toward paper, but everything blurred. The last thing I remember before darkness took me was her voice in my ear. "You're doing the right thing, Laura. Just sleep." When I woke up the first time, it wasn't in the morgue. It was in a sterile recovery room with 2 bright lights and the hum of machines. My mouth was dry, throat sore. I reached for the call button, but the cord was out of reach. My stomach hurt, burned far worse than I'd expected. I didn't see Rebecca, but someone had left my bag on the table beside me. I dragged it toward me and searched for my phone. It was gone. My wallet was there, my ID, but no phone. Instead, there was a sealed envelope with my name on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it. Inside was a billing summary. It wasn't addressed to me. It was for Organ Retrieval Coordination Services. I reread it 3 times, but the words didn't change. Organ retrieval. My hands shook so badly the paper crumpled. I tried to sit up to scream, to do anything, but the pain in my stomach slammed me back against the bed. A nurse walked in then, a woman in blue scrubs with a clipboard and a strained smile. "You're awake," she said, too casually. "How's the pain?" I stared at her, unable to form words. She adjusted the IV without meeting my eyes. "Your sister's in the waiting room. She'll be glad to know you're doing okay." Okay. I wasn't okay. Something had been done to me, something I hadn't agreed to, and the person waiting outside, the one who had always claimed to love me, was the only one who knew exactly what. That was the first moment I truly felt afraid, not of dying, but of what had been done while I slept, of what else she might take, of who I really was to her all along. Rebecca came in that afternoon, holding a paper cup of black coffee like she hadn't orchestrated the unthinkable. She looked rested. Her hair was pinned back in a clean twist, and she wore the same coat from before, sleek, controlled, expensive. She didn't look like someone who had sold her sister's body for parts. She looked like someone who had finished a difficult but necessary errand. I lay there propped up slightly, my hands clutching the blanket so hard my knuckles ached. The scar beneath it throbbed with every heartbeat. She smiled when she saw me awake. "You made it," she said softly, like I'd just run a marathon instead of surviving a surgery I hadn't consented to. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on her. She walked to the foot of the bed, took a sip of her coffee, then leaned against the wall like she was settling in for a casual conversation. "They told me everything went smoothly," she said. "Minimal blood loss, clean incision. Recovery should be quick." Her tone was light, almost proud. I opened my mouth. My voice cracked. "What did you do to me?" Her face didn't change. If anything, she looked faintly annoyed. "You were in pain. They had to go in anyway. I just expedited things." "Expedited?" I laughed, but it came out as a dry, cracked noise. "You took my kidney." She shrugged. "You only need one." "You're lucky. Some people aren't." I felt like the bed was spinning, like the room was tilting on its axis. "You forged my signature," I said, voice shaking. "You sent me to a backroom clinic and signed me up for what, a black market donation." "It wasn't black market," she snapped the first crack in her calm. "It was private, discreet, legal enough." "Legal enough," I repeated. "You're insane." "No," she said, her voice dropping. "I'm realistic. You have no savings. You live paycheck to paycheck. You have no plan. I got you something to offer, a contribution. You've taken from this family your whole life." The words hit harder than the scalpel had. "Taken," I whispered. "You've lived in my apartment for 2 years. I've fed you, covered your credit card bills, lied to our parents about your arrests. What exactly have I taken?" She stared at me for a long moment, then placed her coffee on the windowsill. "Respect," she said quietly. "Attention. You think I didn't notice how people started looking at you like you mattered, with your little art classes and your sad little life. You got soft sympathy. I got expectations." My jaw dropped. "You're jealous of me." "Don't flatter yourself," she said, but her eyes gave it away. A flicker of something unsteady. "You were never supposed to be more than background. You were support. I was center. And yet here you are, still being the victim, still getting the story." For the first time in our lives, I wasn't afraid of her. I was furious. I'd rather be a victim than a thief. "You're not a victim," she said, stepping closer. "You're a resource, a blood type, a match. You should be grateful." "Grateful," I hissed. "For being gutted." "For mattering," she said coldly. "You mattered, Laura. For once." And that was when I knew. She didn't see me as a person. She never had. To her, I was function, a useful shadow, a part to be harvested and discarded. I turned my face away. I couldn't look at her anymore. "Get out," I whispered. She didn't argue. She picked up her coffee and walked out like she'd won something, like I was the one who should be ashamed. And for a moment, I almost was, because a part of me, a small and broken part, still wanted her to come back, still wanted her to explain, to apologize, to say she didn't mean it. But she didn't. And I was left in that hospital bed shaking with stitches that weren't just in my skin, but in every part of who I used to be. I left the hospital 2 days later with painkillers, a half-healed scar, and a gut full of questions no amount of medication could numb. Rebecca stopped answering my calls. I didn't know if I wanted her to. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the flat indifference, the sharp calculation in her eyes when she told me I should be grateful. I didn't feel human. I felt like something that had been used and emptied, stitched up only because the container was still needed. I went back to my apartment alone. Rebecca's things were gone. No note, no apology, not even a mess. Just empty drawers and a faint scent of her perfume that clung to the hallway like a ghost. It made me sick. The first night back, I couldn't sleep. I searched through my own medical files, insurance emails, anything that could explain how this had been allowed. What I found made my blood run colder than the morgue ever had. There was a document when I had no memory of signing, consenting to organ removal in the event of surgical necessity. My signature was there, or at least someone's idea of it, sloppy, slightly off, forged, and next to it a co-signer, a witness, my mother. I stared at the name until it blurred. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Our relationship had always been strained, colored by unspoken rules and inherited silence. She had always taken Rebecca's side. When I'd cry as a child, she'd say I was sensitive. When Rebecca would lie or manipulate, she'd say she was misunderstood. I drove to her house the next morning, every part of me vibrating with something between rage and disbelief. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. She looked older, smaller than I remembered. "Come in, Laura," she said, stepping aside. I stood in her doorway and didn't move. "You signed off on my kidney." Her face didn't flinch. "You're being dramatic." I took a step forward. "You signed a paper that let them take part of me without consent." She sighed, already tired. "You were in surgery. You weren't waking up. Rebecca said it was urgent, that she had it arranged safely. You're fine now." I stared at her disgust curling through me. "Did you even ask what I wanted?" "We had to make a decision," she said. "Rebecca's the one who can handle things." She stepped up. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "She stepped up to sell my organs." My mother frowned. "She didn't sell anything. She said it was a donation for a private patient in need." "And that makes it better," I shouted. "You thought it was okay to cut into your daughter and take a part of her for someone you don't even know." Her voice rose too brittle and defensive. "You've always been ungrateful, always seeing the worst. Rebecca's made sacrifices. She said this could help you too." "Help me," my voice cracked. "How?" "By making me worth something finally, by giving me value as a body part." "You're overreacting," she said, turning away. "You're alive. You're healthy. You'll recover, and maybe next time think about what you contribute before you judge the ones who actually do something." I stood there in stunned silence. There was no apology coming, no regret, just a mother who saw me as weak and a sister who saw me as currency. I left the house shaking. I got in my car and sat behind the wheel with my hands clenched so tight I thought my bones might crack. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive off the road. But mostly, I wanted to disappear. Not because I was ashamed, but because the two people who had shaped my entire life had finally confirmed what I'd always feared: they never saw me. Not really. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I was a convenience, a storage unit, a body to be harvested when needed, and that realization didn't just break my heart. It incinerated everything I'd ever called home. The days that followed were a blur of nausea, cold sweats, and a rage that lived just beneath my skin. I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. I kept dreaming I was back on that metal table, except in the dream, I couldn't scream, couldn't move, and Rebecca was standing over me with a scalpel humming softly. I needed answers. I needed proof. But most of all, I needed someone who could help me fight back. That was when I remembered Megan. We hadn't spoken in over a year. She'd been my best friend through college and the first few years of teaching. She was the one who'd helped me get out of my first serious relationship when it turned toxic. But like everything in my life, the closeness frayed once Rebecca came back into the picture. Megan never liked her. She said Rebecca reminded her of a lawyer she once had to cross-examine a woman who could smile while tearing someone apart. I didn't listen. I thought she was being protective, maybe jealous. But now I saw it. I sent Megan a message that simply said, "I need you." She responded in less than 5 minutes. The next day, she came to my apartment. When she saw me pale thinner, with bags under my eyes and moving like someone stitched together with wire, her jaw clenched. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. From the moment I collapsed to the moment I found the forged signature to the confrontation with my mother. I showed her the document, the scar, the hospital summary, the envelope from the clinic. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she pulled out her laptop and started typing. "We're going to need medical records, financial trails, and proof of consent fraud," she said. "And if we're lucky, we'll find a nurse or staff member willing to talk." That's when I remembered her, the nurse in blue scrubs. She was the only one who had looked me in the eye at the clinic, the only one whose smile didn't feel rehearsed. I hadn't gotten her name, but I remembered her face. Megan began making calls, digging through state databases, hunting down staff lists. 3 hours later, she found her. "Ms. Jenkins, registered nurse, works irregular shifts." Megan sent her an email from her law office address requesting a private conversation. To our surprise, Ms. Jenkins replied within the hour. We met her the next morning at a cafe on the edge of town. She looked nervous, scanning the room as she sat down. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, fingers twitching against her coffee cup. "I've seen things out of that clinic. Rich clients, quiet paperwork, patients who don't wake up for days." "Did you assist in my surgery?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, I was only post-op care. I checked your vitals." That was when I saw the document. It didn't look like a normal consent form. Too vague. No listed donor ID. Megan leaned in. "Would you be willing to give a statement?" Ms. Jenkins hesitated. "If it helps you stop them? Yes. But I can't go public. Not yet." "We'll protect your identity," Megan promised. That evening, she helped me write an affidavit attaching scans of the documents, timestamps, and what Ms. Jenkins observed. That was the first piece of real power I'd held in weeks. But we weren't done. Megan pulled bank records and found something that made her curse out loud. Rebecca had received a deposit of $42,000 the day after my surgery. "She didn't just steal from you," Megan said. "She sold you." My mouth went dry. "Who bought it?" "We'll find out," she said. "But first we build the case. We expose her, not just legally, publicly." That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I finally had direction. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing for war. Megan didn't just file a complaint. She launched a full assault. Within 72 hours, she had sent packets to the state medical board, the district attorney's office, and 3 local news outlets. Inside each were copies of forged documents, the timeline of my hospitalization, the signed affidavit from Ms. Jenkins, and proof of the financial transaction linked to Rebecca's account. She didn't want to start small. She wanted a firestorm, and she got one. The first article dropped on a midweek morning. I was eating dry toast, trying to keep down nausea, when Megan's voice came through my phone. "It's out," the headline read. "Woman wakes up missing organ sister under investigation." Within hours, it spread. Local news picked it up, then regional. By the end of the day, I was getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if it was true. I didn't answer most of them. I was too busy watching the world turn upside down. The clinic was shut down for investigation. A representative from the Department of Health made a public statement about grave ethical concerns and unauthorized procedures. Rebecca's name was everywhere, and yet somehow she still played her game. She went on television, polished, unbothered, wearing pearls and her usual controlled smile. This was a misunderstanding, she told the camera. My sister was ill. The surgery saved her life. Any compensation received was for consulting work I had done previously. The interviewer pushed gently. But did your sister consent to the organ being removed? Rebecca smiled wider. She signed the paperwork. She didn't blink, didn't even flinch. Watching her lie so effortlessly, so convincingly, made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream at the screen to rip it from the wall. Instead, Megan booked a slot for me the following week. Live interview, national broadcast. You don't have to do this, she said gently. You've already done more than enough. But I did. I needed the world to hear it from me. I wore a dark blue blouse that didn't show the hollow in my frame or the scar under the fabric. I sat under the bright lights and took a breath as the cameras rolled. I didn't consent, I said. I was in pain. I was vulnerable. I trusted my sister to take care of me, and she sold part of my body for cash. I wasn't informed. I wasn't protected. I was used. The interviewer asked questions. I answered each one steady measured, but inside I was shaking. I felt exposed, raw. But it wasn't shame. It was fury. It was reclamation. I wasn't the fragile little sister anymore. I was a woman who had been dissected and refused to stay silent. The response was instant. Thousands of messages flooded social media. Some women shared their own stories of medical betrayal, of family abuse, of being used and discarded. Others expressed outrage, demanding arrests, justice reform. A week later, Rebecca was arrested. The charges: medical fraud, unlawful organ procurement, identity theft. She was taken from her townhouse in handcuffs, still in heels, still wearing lipstick. Cameras caught her trying to shield her face as reporters shouted questions. The trial date was set for 3 months later. Megan prepared every angle: witnesses, documents, expert testimony. Even my mother was subpoenaed. She didn't speak to me after that. She didn't need to. Her silence was just another kind of confession. In court, Rebecca looked smaller. Still composed, still stylish, but something in her eyes was different. She scanned the room like she was looking for a way out and couldn't find one. When I took the stand, my hands trembled. But my voice didn't. My sister didn't just betray me, I said. She violated my autonomy, my safety, and my trust. This wasn't about medicine. It was about power, control, and I will live with the consequences for the rest of my life. The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty. 15 years. No parole for the first 8. As the verdict was read, Rebecca didn't cry. She just stared at me, expression blank, like she still couldn't believe I'd dared to fight back. But I had, and I'd won. Not just in the courtroom, but in the court of everyone who had ever watched someone like her get away with it. I walked out of that courthouse with the weight of 1,000 unshed tears pressing behind my eyes. But they didn't fall. Not yet. Not until later. Not until I was alone. For now I was upright, whole even with one kidney missing, and more alive than I'd ever been. The victory didn't feel like I thought it would. I expected relief, catharsis, a wave of justice washing everything clean. But instead, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The cameras disappeared, the reporters moved on, the courtrooms closed, and I was left alone in an apartment that felt like a mausoleum of memories I no longer wanted. My sister was in prison. My mother had gone completely silent. No calls, no letters, not even a shallow denial, just nothing. The part of me that used to care about what she thought had withered during the trial, but the ache of abandonment still lived deep in the marrow. I tried to return to normal, but normal didn't exist anymore. I flinched at loud noises. I woke in the middle of the night expecting pain checking my side to make sure no one had touched me. I stopped trusting anyone who moved too quietly. I developed a habit of locking every door in my apartment twice, then 3 times. I'd stare at the locks and forget what I was doing. I saw a therapist once. She listened patiently, nodded at the right moments, but when she said, "You're safe now," I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Safety had always been an illusion. I'd grown up in the care of people who could rationalize anything as love. I had been praised for being obedient, punished for setting boundaries. When the betrayal came, it wasn't a break, it was a continuation. That was the real horror, the realization that everything I had accepted as normal was never safe. Not once. Megan visited often. She brought Soup Flowers articles about healing and trauma. She never asked if I was okay. She knew better. But she stayed. She sat with me in the dark when I couldn't move. She answered texts at 3 in the morning when I spiraled into memories I couldn't suppress. And slowly, I started doing things again. I walked around the block. I cooked meals that didn't come from a box. I painted. Not the cheerful scenes I used to do for the children I taught, but raw, jagged shapes, torn colors, screams in brushstrokes. I didn't show them to anyone. Not yet. They weren't for sale. They were for survival. There were nights I thought about leaving, changing my name, disappearing. But I didn't. I had spent my whole life being erased by someone else's shadow. I wasn't going to do it to myself. Not now. Not after everything. The worst moment came one morning when I looked in the mirror and saw her, Rebecca. Not literally, but something in my eyes, the angle of my mouth, the way I stood tense and calculating. For a heartbeat, I couldn't tell us apart. It terrified me. I smashed the mirror. Glass scattered across the sink, blood dripped from my palm, but I didn't stop shaking until I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour whispering, "I am not her," over and over. I didn't want justice to turn me into a mirror of what I had fought. I didn't want to carry the weight of her cruelty and let it harden me into something sharp. So I started writing. Every night. A letter to myself, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes just a list of reasons to keep going. One kidney, one breath, one moment. It wasn't healing, not yet. But it was something. It was mine. The first time I taught again, I almost canceled. It wasn't a school classroom, not anymore. I couldn't go back to fluorescent lights and bell schedules and the distant hum of administrators whispering about test scores. Instead, it was a community art center tucked into the corner of an old renovated library. The walls smelled like dust and clay and potential. The program director, a kind man named Luis who wore paint-streaked jeans and had a laugh like warm bread, had invited me after seeing one of my post-trial interviews. "We've got kids who've been through things," he said. "Things they don't talk about. You look like someone who won't make them talk. Just let them make." The first session was quiet. 4 girls, 3 boys, all between ages 7 and 12. One wouldn't speak. One wouldn't stop talking. None of them made eye contact for more than a second. I understood that. I didn't ask them to draw flowers or rainbows. I asked them to draw the thing they were afraid of. They looked at me like I'd broken a rule. But slowly, they picked up pencils. Charcoal, crayons. One drew a house with no doors. One drew a mouth with no face. Another drew fire. I didn't ask what any of it meant. I didn't need to. I just told them what no one ever told me. You don't have to make it pretty. You just have to make it yours. At the end of the day, one of the girls, a 9-year-old named Kayla, slipped me a folded paper before leaving. It was a heart cracked down the middle, stitched together with red thread. I almost cried right there on the floor. That night I went home and pulled out my own canvases. I painted for hours, not for survival this time, but for release. I stopped trying to make sense of everything. I stopped looking for resolution. I accepted that some stories don't end with clarity. Some wounds don't close neatly, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve to be seen. Megan called that weekend with good news. A nonprofit organization had picked up our case. They wanted to feature my story in a campaign about medical ethics and consent. They'd pay a speaking fee, cover travel, connect me with survivors of similar betrayals. For a moment, I hesitated. I didn't want to be known only as the girl with the missing kidney. But then I realized no one else had told my story. And silence was what had allowed it to happen in the first place. I agreed. The first speaking event was in a modest theater, 50 people in folding chairs sipping bad coffee. I stood at the front, heart hammering, hands damp, and said the words I'd rehearsed 100 times. My body was taken from me, piece by piece. First, in the way I was raised to believe my pain didn't matter. Then in the way I was told to stay quiet. And finally, when my own blood cut me open and called it love, I paused, watching the eyes watching me. But I'm still here, scarred, angry, alive, and I refuse to be quiet anymore. They stood when I finished. Not everyone, but enough. Later, a woman in her 60s hugged me and whispered, "I thought I was the only one." I hugged her back, because that's what I had always wanted too. To know I wasn't alone. To know survival could be shared, not erased. That night, I walked home and passed by a mirror in the hallway. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I didn't see Rebecca. I saw me, and for the first time in months, I didn't look away. I'm telling this story not because I want sympathy, not because I need validation. I'm telling it because someone somewhere needs to hear that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears your face. Sometimes it calls itself family. And sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones dressed up as care. When I was a child, I believed that love meant obedience, that silence was survival, that if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, maybe I'd be seen. Maybe I'd be safe. But safety built on submission is just a prettier form of captivity. And love that demands your silence is not love. I've spent months pulling apart every moment that led to that morgue table, every comment, every dismissal, every choice to shrink instead of speak. And what I've realized is that the cycle didn't start with the scalpel. It started long before. It started the first time I was told to be quiet when I cried, when I was told Rebecca was just stressed, that she didn't mean it, that she was trying her best. We excused cruelty because it came from someone we were supposed to love. We let it grow roots because the world teaches us that family is sacred even when it poisons us. But I don't believe in sacred anymore. I believe in earned. And Rebecca never earned my silence. She only demanded it. And our mother? She enforced it. That ends with me. If you're reading this and you've been taught to forgive without apology, to love without boundaries, to give without consent, I need you to hear this. Love is not measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. It's measured by how much truth you're allowed to speak. I lost a part of my body. I lost my sister, my mother, my history. But I found something more dangerous. I found my voice, and I've used it to fight, to teach, to build, to reclaim. Not just for me, for every person who's ever been betrayed behind closed doors. For every child who grew up believing they had to earn their place at the dinner table. For every adult still trying to heal a wound no one else can see. I don't want revenge, not anymore. I want interruption. I want every hand that reaches for someone else's silence to come back empty. I want the cycle broken. Loudly. Permanently. Because my story is not about a kidney, it's about consent, about identity, about the quiet power of saying no, and the thunder that follows when no one expects you to survive. I did. I survived, and that's how I won.